Order in the court.
Saji, Sawi, Sahar, the man who sued God. This story is fictional but based on a real event that occurred in 2008. Saji stood in front of the villagers in the court and said,
"May God curse the day I was born, and the night I was conceived, so that today becomes darkness. Neither the God cares for me from above, nor does the sun shine upon me during the day. Just as the slave longed for darkness, and the laborer begs for his wages, I demand my right. The eye of God does not see me. His gaze is upon me, but he does not notice me. I won't hold back my tongue. I am fed up. I want him to stay away from me. My days are already difficult enough. Who is he, the God, to consider and afflict me in this manner, to anticipate me every day and test me every moment? Till when will he remain unaware of me, and not show me a little mercy, so that I can catch my breath? Is it my fault? What should I do, O observer of people? Why have you set me as target for you, until I became a burden on myself? But now I'm returning to dust. If he needs me, I won't be there. If I ask for him, he responds once in 1,000 times. And he is free because who can overpower him? His anger can swallow mountains and shake the earth. He commands the sun not to rise and extinguishes the stars. Now he passes by me and doesn't see me. He walks in front of me, and I feel nothing. At the end, who can say to him, "What are you doing?" Yet you want me to ask for his mercy. The one who crushes me with his earthquakes. He is the one who enhances my wounds without reason, not allowing me to catch my breath, but constantly overwhelming me with bitterness. As from the perspective of power, he says, "I am he." And from the perspective of justice, he says, "Who will judge me?" So, if I am acquitted, he will pass judgment on me, and if I am complete, he will punish me. Then why should I exhaust myself for? Even if I wash myself in snow and clean my hands with acids, he will still drown me in sewers until my clothes hate me. For he isn't human being like me to confront him. There are no interests between us to be held accountable. Let him lift his anger from me, and not surprise me with his terror, and I will speak without fear. But he has put his hand upon me, and I will allow myself to complain. I speak with bitterness, saying to God, "Do not blame me. Make me understand why you are contending with me. Is it good for you to have the right to oppress, to destroy the work of your hands, and shine on the path of the wicked? Your hand created me, and fashioned me completely. Will you consume me? You made me from clay only to return me to dust. You covered me with skin and flesh, wove me with bones and nerves. You gave me life and mercy, but you concealed my actions within your heart. If I sinned, you would notice me, and not absolve me of my mistakes. If I committed a wrongdoing, woe unto me. And if I were acquitted, I would not dare to lift my head before you. I am filled with humiliation, and I see my weakness. Even if I raise my head, you would capture me like a lion, and boast over my downfall. Your witnesses rise against me, and your anger intensifies. War and an army are against me. So why did you bring me out of the womb? You could have let me surrender my soul, and be unseen by any eye as if I never existed, and to go from the womb to the grave. Even though there is no injustice on my hands, and my prayers are pure. And until now, the heavens testify to me, and serve as evidence of my innocence on high. I know that God hears me, this is my word, and I want God to respond to me. Whoever hath the complaint against me, write it against me, and I will bear it on my shoulders, and turn it into a crown on my head.
You son of a bitch!
Goddamn motherfucking stupid piece of shit!
Too much? Very much? What is this? I ask for forgiveness from the mighty God. What happened? Once upon a time, in the ancient times, in the depths of the age, there was... You know what? After reconsideration, I've decided not to tell you what happened. I'll leave it to your imagination. Try to discover it by yourselves.
Your Honor, dear villagers, let me tell you the story of a beloved young man named Manum, the unfortunate Lucky.
The lawyer said to the judge.
Manum was a young, wealthy man. He was the youngest of his siblings and his father's favorite. Anyway, Manum was like Professor Saji here, a man who walked according to the commands of God. One time, Manum went to offer sacrifices to God in a desert called Shechem. After he presented the sacrifice to God, he got lost in a desert called Dothan. There, Your Honor, God struck the desert with fog, and unlucky Manum couldn't see ahead of him. He stumbled and fell into a deep pit, a well that swallowed him up, and he couldn't get out of it. Anyway, while some merchants were heading to Egypt, they passed by and found Manum. They saw him, captured him, tied him up among the slaves, and when they arrived in Egypt, they sold him to the king. So, is this the reward for Manum, O God? The man who used to do good for you has been sold as a slave. He used to be a rich, generous, honored master in his own home among his family. Personally, I don't approve of this, let alone you, O God. Anyway, the story doesn't end here. Unlucky Manum found favor in the eyes of the king, and due to his honesty, was appointed responsible for all the king's wealth. And not only that, just as he found favor in the eyes of the king, he also found favor in the eyes of the king's wife. One day, when the king was not in the palace, his wife approached Manum and pressured him to commit adultery with her. She threatened to inform the king that he was stealing from the treasury if he didn't comply. Of course, Your Honor, any one of us in Manum Place wouldn't need to be threatened to sleep with the king's wife, right? But no, Manum was different. He refused, and what was the result? Manum was thrown into prison, confined with murderers and thieves, simply because he refused to disobey or deviate from the commands of God. So, is this his reward? The man refused to do evil and ended up in prison? Where is God in all of this? Personally, I don't approve of this, let alone you, O God. Anyway, years passed, and Manum remained imprisoned. Suddenly, a disease struck a fellow prisoner in the cell with Manum, a disease that baffled all the doctors, and they couldn't find any treatment. However, Manum had knowledge in medicine, thanks to the blessing and talent bestowed upon him by God. Manum intervened and saved the life of the prisoner. Days went by, Your Honor, and this prisoner was released from prison and appointed in the king's palace. Then suddenly, the king's only male heir and sole successor to the throne fell ill with a strange disease. All the palace doctors failed to cure him. The prisoner whom Manum saved told the king about him, and in his desperation, the king sought Manum's assistance. And indeed, Manum saved the king's only son from death. So far, the story seems complete. And when Manum was living with his family, his life was better. But let me add the ending to the story. The king appointed Manum as his deputy, making him the first and final authority in all the affairs of Egypt, while the king himself became a mere figurehead. Manum became the true director of events. After that, dear villagers, Manum sent for his family to inquire about them and ensure their well-being. He discovered that they were living below the poverty line and on the verge of starvation because the country was in a state of recession and hunger afflicted everyone. Manum, Your Honor, sent for his family and had them come to live with him in Egypt, where they enjoyed the blessings bestowed upon him by God. But that's not all. God granted Manum the wisdom to save the people and the country from famine and the danger of poverty. He became a national hero in the eyes of all, and books recorded his story, while poets wrote poetry about him and sang his praises. Now, Your Honor, now, dear villagers. Now, Professor Saji, if God hadn't struck the desert with fog, would Manum have been able to save his family? If God hadn't saved Manum from falling into the well, would he have been able to save the people in the country from hunger? If God hadn't allowed Manum to enter prison or escape from it, would he have achieved the position that God had destined for him in Egypt? The answer is no, Your Honor. The answer is no, dear villagers. The answer is no, Professor Saji, because the wisdom of our Lord is much greater and superior than our simple, limited minds can comprehend. I can almost guarantee that if Manum had known the plan that God had set for him, he would have willingly chosen it from the beginning. And if you, Professor Saji, knew the end of the path you desire, and knew the path that God has mapped out for you, you would choose the path that God has designed for you instead of your own path. and instead of standing here and judging the Almighty. Thank you, Your Honor.
That's a logical argument, but Saji stood calmly and replied to him, saying,
I wonder how anything you can't explain is attributed to the wisdom of God. Is God incapable of executing his plan for us in a different way? Is God incapable of avoiding pain, suffering, and hardship while mapping out our path? Let me tell you that God is capable of executing his wisdom in a different manner. God could have allowed your friend Manum to save his family from hunger, save the people, and become the most influential figure in Egypt without subjecting him to slavery, imprisonment, or wearing the flesh of his fellow prisoner, or the innocent son of the king. How many here have suffered and endured pain for the sake of God's wisdom being executed? It would have been just as easy for the Almighty to achieve the same result, but through a different path.
The lawyer interrupted and interjected,
My dear friend, if that's the case, then in my opinion God should have created us in the paradise of eternal bliss, not sends us down to earth. Isn't that right, Your Honor? But humans are born to toil and suffer, to exert effort. It's a punishment for our expulsion from Eden. But do you want God to work according to your own preferences? Must it be your way, your dreams, and your goals, in the style that pleases you, at the time you determine, in the place and age that suits you? Or will you declare war on God and demand his trial?
Here, the lawyer thought he had won the debate, and that Saji had no response, until Saji spoke up and said,
Isn't it that he created us free? You mentioned earlier that God plans and draws the most suitable path for us, and if I knew the end of my path, I would choose the path that God drew.
The lawyer responded,
Exactly.
Then Saji continued his speech.
Your Honor, this statement is not true. It is a prevailing belief among the villagers, but it is incorrect and a mistaken belief, because it simply contradicts the fact that God created us free. We are the ones who draw the path, we are the ones who decide the plan. God does not set a goal for us to follow.
The lawyer quickly replied,
So you claim that God created us and abandoned us?
Saji responded,
Precisely. Just as a mother gives birth and throws her children into the world, he intervenes only when he needs to conduct experiments, shake the earth, unleash floods, and unleash violent winds to test us, to examine us. Your Honor, I have chosen to suffocate and die rather than live imprisoned in this body.
The lawyer intervened and said,
Your Honor, allow me to address my words to my esteemed teacher, Saji. The meaning of your words, sir, is that God is a negative deity who created us and abandoned us. Your Honor, this is an unfounded claim, because the question here is not whether God intervenes in our lives or not. Surely God does intervene in our lives, but the question here is to what extent does he intervene? Your Honor, this is a question I cannot answer. God is not a machine that I can determine the extent to which he can enter our lives. He is an unlimited being who interacts with us and enters each person's life to a certain degree, in a certain way, and at a certain time. I cannot confine God to a programmed entity that acts or interacts in a fixed manner. But what I can confirm, Your Honor, is that we are indeed free, and God's intervention in our lives is not forced or a violation of our decisions and freedom. And it is certain, Your Honor, that God intervenes through guidance, through direction. Can he intervene beyond guidance? I don't know, Your Honor. Professor Saji, let me ask you, don't you believe that the problems and crises we experience in our lives are wisdom from God, and the purpose is for us to come out better and gain more from them?
Saji replied to the lawyer and said,
No, not necessarily. It's very normal for us to go through problems and crises without the intervention of God's wisdom. It's also normal for us to come out of them with problems and psychological shocks that didn't exist before. We may overcome them or not. Your Honor, old age has given me wisdom, and the passing of time has given me understanding. God possesses wisdom and power, and he has counsel and insight. Yet, he remains silent, doesn't show himself, and restricts human beings. He stops the water, causing it to dry up, and then releases it, causing the earth to overturn. Although he possesses greatness and understanding, he misleads and causes others to go astray. He prohibits wisdom from judges, also abandons the priests, and leads astray the elders. He weakens the strong and silences the voice of honest people. He weakens the righteous, but brings the wrongdoers into the light. He increases nations and destroys them. He expands peoples and disperses them. He confounds the minds of the rulers of the earth, leaving them without guidance. They grope in darkness while walking and cannot find the light. They stumble like drunkards. All of this my eyes have seen, my ears have heard, and I have come to know. My accusations are not baseless. Water is rendered stagnant by stones, and floods carry away the earth. Just like how God destroys the hopes of humans, he shows arrogance to humans and makes them walk away from him, disfiguring their lives and expelling them. And humans, in their weakness, suffer physical pain, and their souls lament for themselves. He has now abandoned me, disrupted all my groups, captured my soul, and his anger has devoured and persecuted me. I was at ease, but he scattered me, afflicted me, and made me a target. He surrounded me with his arrows, broke me with wound upon wound, and trampled upon me like a mighty one, tore my flesh, and buried my head in the dust. I've cried until my eyes turned red, and in my eyes there is the spirit of death.
At this point, the lawyer quickly became angry and vigorously defended himself.
Professor Saji, it is your own mouth that accuses you, not me. Your own lips testify against you. Your Honor, I no longer need reasons to defend God. Professor Saji, you have erred against God, and what has happened and is happening to you is nothing but discipline from the Almighty, because you have sinned against a great being. So do not reject the discipline. Your Honor, if your son makes a mistake, you discipline him. If my son gets too close to fire, I slap his hand. Why, Your Honor, do you discipline your son? Why did I slap my son's hand when he got too close to the fire? Why? Because if I had left him without discipline, Your Honor, he would have become a disobedient and corrupt son. Discipline and punishment are only means to protect him from destruction, to safeguard him. Your Honor, I request the honorable people of the village that if anyone among them has witnessed a sin or an act that has angered God from the accused Saji Soy Sahar before this trial, they should come forward and testify to what Professor Saji has done wrong.
The judge, the lawyer, and Saji looked at the courtroom, waiting for anyone from the village to stand up, but no one moved from their place. Then Saji stood up confidently and said,
If destruction is for the doer of evil and punishment is for the sinner, doesn't he see my path and count every step I take? If I walk the path of lies or run towards cheating, let me be weighed in the scales of truth, and let God know that I am righteous. If my steps deviated from the path and my thought followed my eyes, or a fault stuck down in my hand, and then let me sow and let others reap. If my heart wandered to another woman, or if I desired harm to my neighbor, then let my wife be for someone else, and my house be ruined because that is wickedness, and I deserve to be judged for it. If I refuse the rights of my tenant, then let my crops be set on fire, so that when I am judged, I know what I have done, and when I am asked, I can answer. Ah, if only I knew where I could find him, I would go to his seat and present my case before him, and my tongue would be filled with arguments, and I would know what he would say. I would understand his words and responses. I would hear from him why he had disputed me, because he used to pay attention to me. I used to ask him, and I would find him coming to me from troubles. But now I go to the east, and I don't find him. I go to the west, and I don't sense him. I move to the north to examine his works, but I don't find them. I turn to the south, and I don't see him, although my feet have never left his path, and I have never turned my back on him. But he weakened my heart, and God terrified me. He did not deliver me from darkness, and he did not uncover my face from the shadows. What happened to me is unfair.
Then the lawyer stood up and asked one question.
Professor Saji, are you saying that God is unjust?
A long silence fell upon the courtroom. Saji remained standing silently for a long time before he spoke.
No, but he has treated me unjustly.
The lawyer exploded and said,
Fine. We don't need witnesses anymore.
He then turned to the people of the village and said to them,
I ask the honorable people of the village that if anyone witnessed a sin or action that angers God from the accused Saji Sawi Sahar before or during this trial, they should stand in their place.
The lawyer finished his statement and said,
Now you may be seated. Let me ask you a question, Professor Saji. Does God accept good, but not evil? And if so, did that make him unfair towards you? Let me tell you, Professor Saji, that God does not increase or decrease his blessings or punishments based on your deeds. God is not waiting for blessings, nor is he waiting to catch you in your sins. However, the evil that God allows to befall you is a result of your great sins. Even if you are righteous, your children and your wife may commit sins. The punishment that has befallen you is a consequence of your actions and the actions of your household. One more thing I want to add, my dear Professor Saji, is that if you knew how God disciplines, you would realize that he punishes you less than your sins deserve. Thank you, Your Honor.
The lawyer believed that he had won the case. He succeeded in defending God's position. However, Saji remained steadfast in his defense and addressed the audience.
Wisdom dies within you people. I understand just like you, if not more. I've been in this world for a long time, and I have seen and will speak of what I have witnessed. The houses of the wicked are at ease and thriving, and those who disobey God are content. How is it that God, who is the giver, is aware? What you know about God I also know. But I want to speak to the Almighty and bring my case before him. But you twist the truth and appease God, and you hypocritically try to please the Almighty to gain his favor. I wish you would be silent and not speak, for your silence would be wisdom. Are you going to speak in defense of God through injustice? Will you speak in deceit? Will you argue and dispute for his sake? Do you think it will benefit you when he examines your heart? Or do you not remember that you deceive him just as you deceive humans? He reproaches and condemns you when you praise him with lies. Your speeches are ashes, and your defense is made of clay.
At this point, the judge intervened and asked Saji a question that he personally wanted to know the answer to.
Professor Saji, let's assume for the sake of argument that you won the case. What judgment do you expect me to execute against God, and how would it be enforced?
Saji was prepared with a well-crafted response and said to the judge,
Since God cannot be contained or judged in a worldly manner like humans, I request the court to issue an order for the demolition of a place of worship, just as God demolished my house. I also request the execution of 3 representatives of worship, one in place of my wife, another in place of my sons, and the 3rd in place of my daughters. Furthermore, I request a complete cessation of financial aid to places of worship, just as God has cut off my sources of income and sustenance. All of this should happen suddenly and without prior warning, so that the believers fear going to places of worship and suddenly feel the weight on their minds. This would test and examine their true faith, just as God has tested and examined mine.
The entire hall fell silent, shocked and disbelieving. Then they began to get agitated with Saji, but he stood firm in his position. The lawyer couldn't remain silent any longer, so he intervened and asked Saji,
Professor Saji, what you have experienced in your life is undoubtedly unfortunate, and its impact on you is evident. But do you believe that God is to blame here? From your perspective, is God responsible for the evil in the world?
Saji stood up and answered,
The evil that is not of human making. God created the universe. He created us. He designed the earth, humans, and all creatures. Therefore, I hold God accountable for the evil that resulted from his designs. The earthquakes, the volcanoes, the storms, the floods, and the anger of the sea. I hold God accountable for all natural disasters, diseases, Earth's creatures, famines, and deformed children. All of these are valid accusations, and God is expected to answer them.
The lawyer didn't show bias. On the contrary, he remained calm and responded to Saji with utmost confidence.
The truth is, I don't have an answer. Why does God disappear in times of distress? I don't know. But let me ask you, Professor Saji, do you believe that after being expelled from Eden, we now live in an accurately fallen world?
Saji responded curiously.
Don't be presumptuous, Mr. Lawyer. I know where your question is leading. Your path is clear. In response to your question, yes, precisely, we live in a fallen world, and that doesn't address my accusation.
The lawyer then continued his statement.
Give me my chance, my teacher Saji. Perhaps you will learn a lesson. Your Honor, because we live in a fallen world, everything has changed. The world has rebelled against humans, and as a result, there have been revolutions against humans periodically. Do you believe that the weather, nature, or animals in Eden were the same as what we are witnessing now? After the corruption and fall of humanity, the weather changed. The animals changed. They turned against humans and started preying on them. The same goes for microorganisms like bacteria and viruses that attack and harm humans, causing diseases. Also, the corruption of humans against the environment led the environment to retaliate. Everything is related to humans since the beginning of the fall. The rebellion of nature, the rebellion of different creatures, and even the corruption of humans against themselves and others. Just like someone who lived in a palace and was expelled onto the streets. The laws of the palace, sir, are different from the laws of the street. Do you want to live by the laws of the palace in the street? Your accusation is invalid. A God is innocent of the evil in the world.
Saji remained silent for a while before answering.
You must be very proud of yourself, Mr. Lawyer, defending God. A noble goal that makes you feel valuable, thinking that God from above is proud of you. I sincerely hope, Mr. Lawyer, from the bottom of my heart, that you wear my shoes. You will hate your life, your screams will go unheard, and bitterness will consume you. Everything you fear will come upon you. You won't find tranquility, solace, or rest, and death will be a mercy in your eyes. Your defense, Mr. Lawyer, does not exonerate your client. It does not absolve God of the evil of the laws of nature. Listen to me, people of the village, and think. Consider yourselves dreaming, and let your imaginations roam without restrictions. Is God innocent of the evil of the laws of nature? Answer me, Mr. Lawyer. Maybe you are more knowledgeable than me. Who is responsible for the earthquakes that destroy homes and displace families? Who is responsible for the flood that swallows the land? If not God, then who? What is my fault for being born into a world full of problems and design flaws, and having to bear the consequences of its upheavals? God should either create correctly, or not create at all.
Take it back, take it back, take it back. Don't forget who you are, and don't deceive yourself with your questions. Your question is nice, but I regret to inform you that your accusation is still invalid. God created laws for nature. Isn't that beautiful? He established them and set them in motion beautifully. Without intentionally controlling and manipulating them all the time, he set a foundation for them. And from there, the world started moving and functioning. When does he intervene to stop or alter their course? And when does he not? No one knows. So, if we look at a catastrophe like famines, God doesn't prevent famines, even though they are caused by humans. And if humans distributed food justly, no one would die of hunger. But God has the ability to send food to the hungry in his own way, whether through an individual or a group, or whatever method he chooses to use. Here, famines are not prevented and still exist, but he created a means for them. All of this is natural phenomena that operate without any problem, evil, or intention in their existence. They are the result of a carefully designed process and laws for the continuity of the earth.
Saji wasn't convinced by the lawyer's words, and continued to argue against him.
So that means God is a failed designer because all of these damages are the outcomes of his creation and designs. If he is not directly responsible for their occurrence, then it reflects his failure in design and creation.
Everyone was amazed by Saji's audacity and his clear crossing of boundaries. The people in the village were angry, and even the lawyer was surprised by his response.
Nothing will stop you, right? You won't back down. Professor Saji, do you believe that God is limited or unlimited?
Saji replied.
God is unlimited, and you, as a biased and non-neutral human, let your fear push you to take sides with God without using your rational judgment. You want to gain his favor at my expense. If you know that you're biased, just as I know that I'm complete, then justice will be determined.
The lawyer disregarded Saji's words.
Complete? You remind me of my cousin, name was Complete. Anyway, let's forget about me and focus on God. So if God is unlimited, how can your limited thinking establish a standard by which you measure the success or failure of God's designs? You remind me of someone I love, named Fady Edward. He had a son named Anid Sari Badi Fazia. However, Badi was the most famous designer in the village. One time, while he was working on a huge building, his son Anid entered and looked at the building and found a lot of pillars inside. He found a lot of fat and thick pillars in the middle of the building, on the right and left. So, the child said to his father, "What have you done? These pillars are narrowing the building, and they look terrible. In my opinion, we should remove all of them." And a few days later, the Anid hired workers and removed all the pillars of the building. What happened then? The entire building collapsed over his head.
Saji remained silent for a while, and the lawyer thought he had won. Saji started to be convinced, but suddenly he stood up and confidently continued his attack and accusations.
You're right. Honestly, I have knowledge that it is indeed true. I'm not concealing the power of God. I can inform you about his commandments. But you're behaving irrationally because you're more ignorant than the cattle in the field, the fish in the sea, and the birds of the sky. Your Honor, people of the village, open your eyes. If God knows in advance about all the suffering and pain we will experience due to his creation and the laws of nature, then he is a selfish God. Did he create us just to worship him, obey him, love him? Did he create us so that we may glorify and exalt him? When a human being acts this way, they're accused of narcissism. But it is allowed for God? What's the difference between him and a father who begets children to serve him, work for him, and toil for him so that he can spend on himself? Huh? What's the difference between him and a father who decides to have children because he is narcissistic and wants to pass on his imprint on future generations and control them because he just needs someone to entertain him and possess him? He created us because he wanted that, according to his desire. We did not ask for it, despite his knowledge of everything that will happen to us. Such an act calls for questioning his judgment because creation is a selfish act.
The people of the village started to lose their patience, and the lawyer didn't know how to silence Saji. Nevertheless, he maintained his composure and asked Saji with utmost understanding.
Professor Saji, if I tell you that right now I have the power to exchange your life for the life of one of your children, where you would die and he or she would live, would you do it?
Saji responded spontaneously.
You know that I would do it without hesitation.
The lawyer persisted and said to him,
My argument is for the judge, and not you. You are undoubtedly a failure. All right, why are you doing this, Saji? If you allow me to answer, I believe the answer is because you love your children to the extent that you would sacrifice your life for them, right? Is that selfishness on your part, or giving? You might think that when your father left you, it was a selfish act on his part. But that contradicts the act of love, because love is based on giving. And even if your father was a careless father, without me asking you, I can tell that he sacrificed for you with his time, his salary, his efforts. And if he had the ability, he would give himself up for you without hesitation, because he loves you unconditionally, even though he doesn't need you for anything. You don't add anything to his life. On the contrary, he adds to yours. Your success or failure in life is your responsibility. I know I'm stating the obvious, but at the same time, I'm talking about realities that happen in the real world, not just perspectives. God loves us, and God sacrificed and gave his son for us, even though God didn't make any mistakes. He created us in Eden, and we are the sinners, and our punishment is supposed to be death. If creation was selfish, it wouldn't have been possible for God to destroy all of humanity without any remorse or hesitation, and create a being to be worshipped without sin. Isn't he capable of that? Aren't the angels around him worshiping him, glorifying him, and magnifying him? So, he doesn't need us for anything.
Saji appeared desperate, and there was nothing that could stop his attack and accusations.
Exactly. He is indeed capable of that. But as long as he is capable of that, doesn't that make him an unjust God? You know, there are many others like me who are oppressed, whose rights have not been restored, and they cannot speak up. So why do the wicked prosper? And those who want to die, why do they live? Those who are waiting for death and it doesn't come to them, and they dig their own graves. those who rejoice when they find their own tombs. If you're afraid, then be silent and let me speak, and let whatever happens to me happen. But why do I keep biting my tongue and holding my soul in my hand, waiting for him to kill me? I'm not expecting anything, and yet I will continue to defend my path in front of him. That will be my redemption, because a liar cannot stand in his presence. Listen to my words, for I have done well in my invocation before you. But until when will you torment and crush me with your words? And even if I have truly gone astray, my straying is my own affair. If you accuse me of wrongdoing, prove my sins to me. But know that God has wronged me and has surrounded me with his nets. I scream for justice and receive no response. I pray for my rights and there is no justice. He has blocked my way and oppressed my life. He has taken my dignity and removed the crown from my head. He has silenced me from every side and uprooted my hopes like tree roots. His anger has descended upon me, and he has counted me as his enemy. Have mercy on me, show compassion towards me, for the hand of God has touched me. Why do you chase me like God, and never satisfy yourselves with my flesh? But I know that God is alive, and after he destroys my skin, even without my body, I will see God, and he will judge me with justice, knowing that I am innocent. Fear for yourself, for then you will know the true judgment.
The lawyer couldn't understand how someone could contain such anger towards God, but he was aware of Saji's state and circumstances. Anyway, the lawyer stood up and replied to Saji, saying,
Listen, Professor Saji, sometimes one forgets oneself, but as a human being, you are limited beyond what you realize or imagine. You need 100 lifetimes, more than your own lifespan, just to grasp some types of knowledge and diverse cultures that exist in our current era. So, on what basis can we judge whether God is just or unjust, or whether his response is quick or slow in this situation? What information do you have that allows you to evaluate it compared to the actual information that God is well acquainted with and takes into consideration? Do you comprehend all the interconnected factors in the matter? Or do you see your problem through only one factor? You can't even comprehend your entire past. You know that, or your future, or something like, the people you need to meet in your life first, and the things you should learn beforehand, for the response to come later, or things that need to be built or broken within you before the response. Imagine with me, Professor Saji, if someone makes a mistake or harms someone and dies immediately, or gets punished in that instant, then what's the point of the day of judgment where we will be held accountable in the end? What will we be held accountable for when the account has already been settled? You, sir, are dissecting the design you want to happen right now. And if it doesn't happen, then God is unjust. But God has a design for life and how it unfolds, and it is certain that no injustice will go unpunished, no matter how small or big. But will it happen on earth or in the afterlife? These are the timings of God. It is his prerogative, and we cannot pass judgment on it at all, because there are numerous factors that intertwine in the matter and make it more complex than we can judge with simple judgment. Therefore, I demand the innocence of God from these baseless accusations.
At this point, Saji began to lose his temper and responded angrily and nervously.
I've heard this talk many times. None of you know how to console or respond. There's no end to your empty words. I can also speak like you if I were in your place and tell you stories and quotes about the greatness and wisdom of God, but it won't make a difference. If I speak in despair, it won't end. And if I stay silent, How will I find relief? Let's talk with you as wisdom, and arguing is a wasted effort. Your Honor, Mr. Lawyer, let's assume for the sake of argument that your argument is valid, and that God is indeed just. Answer me, enlighten me with knowledge, and increase my understanding. Why do the wicked live their lives, grow old, and gain strength? Their offspring thrive in their presence, and their descendants are held in high regard by them. Their homes are safe from fear, and they are not disciplined by God. Their deeds are successful, and their farms are rich. Their livestock grazes freely, and their children dance. They carry drums on Audis and delight in the sound of the flute. They spend their days in prosperity, and in the end, it is I who get punished. Don't console me with falsehood, and all your answers are nothing but betrayal. God is not attentive to injustice. The wicked enjoy themselves and live their lives, and in the end, it is I who experience suffering. It is I who get punished. It is I who receive discipline. Who can refute me and render my words meaningless?
The lawyer sensed that Saji had stepped into his realm, as if he had been expecting this response from him.
I have a colleague named Said Masood, the son of Taiz al-Mutawis, son of Al-Fartus. We were once leaving the condolence gathering for his father, Taiz al-Mutawis, son of Al-Fartus. May God have mercy on him. And we were walking together. Said passed by the neighboring village and heard about the invention of the camera. He went like a fool and stood in front of it, smiling. I asked him, "Weren't you sad?" Said. He replied, "I was miserable." I said to him, "Why are you laughing then?" Said, "If you were miserable." He said to me, "I stood in front of the camera and saw them doing that." Your Honor, this is a great deception that tells you the path of God is filled with pain and suffering, while the path of the wicked is filled with ease, joy, and happiness, and that everything is beautiful and rosy. This is not the reality at all, and this statement has no basis of truth because it is a very superficial view. The evidence is that most of the suicides here in the village and neighboring villages do not believe in God. If they were so happy, why would they end their lives? The world, Your Honor, is in difficulty for everyone. So why does it seem that the path of the righteous is harder and narrower than that of the wicked? Isn't that your question, Teacher Saji? Because they voluntarily choose to sacrifice certain things in order to follow God. For example, I choose to give some of my earnings to the needy, even if I have to endure hardships. Some people can't find food to eat and go hungry. As for the wide path of the wicked, it is a person who lives for themselves alone. Their reward is only for themselves. They contribute nothing to the existence of others, nor do they participate in building anything. Based on this, the idea you're presenting, Saji, is simply based on misconceptions.
Saji had lost all hope within him and decided to conclude his attack with one final question.
Oh my God, I cry out to you, but you do not respond. I pray, but you pay no attention to me. I have become dry and withered, and you have the power to oppress me. You have abandoned me because I know that death will eventually claim me, and every living being has an appointed time. But in times of destruction, why don't you extend your hand to me? In times of calamity, why don't I find refuge in you? Didn't I weep for the difficult days? Didn't I grieve for the poor? When I begged for goodness, evil came. When I waited for light, darkness enveloped me. My bowels are boiling and won't calm down. Days of humiliation lie ahead of me, with darkness devoid of the sun. My skin is being eaten away, and my bones are decaying. Return, O mournfulness, and let my flute play the sound of weeping. This final question will conclude my accusations, and whatever the judge sees in it, let them pass judgment accordingly. If God is just, and his love for us surpasses the ages, then why the trials and the pain? Why does it linger, and why does the burden fall on humans to endure? And bitterness prolongs while the experience remains, so that when it is lifted, his name is glorified. Is this justice? Is this not selfishness? Is this how a God should care for his people? Your Honor, I demand that the court look upon me with mercy and apply the punishment that justice deems equal to my complaint.
The lawyer prepared his final defense well before the verdict was announced, and he stood up and said,
Once, I traveled to the Western lands and entered an art exhibition called Canvas, where they displayed embroidery art. In this exhibition, artists created artwork using threads on fabric. Anyway, I picked up one of the pieces and looked at it, and it was incredibly beautiful, truly stunning. Then I turned the artwork over and looked at it again, and what did I find? I found a bunch of twisted threads all intertwined, with a chaotic and unclear appearance. Our lives on Earth, Professor Saji, are like the backside of that artwork. You will never understand everything or find an explanation for everything unless you look at the artwork from its front side. Only then will you be able to comprehend and appreciate its beauty. And this, Professor Saji, will only happen when we depart to the Committee of Paradise and look at earthly life from above, from its front side. Does this mean that we have to die in order to understand? No, because you can live on Earth with eternal life. But from an earthly perspective, I can tell you the conclusion that most humans have reached. And I believe that most of the villagers here with us have also reached it. Simply put, the world's nature is like this. It laughs a little and cries a little, and everything has its time under the heavens. A time for birth and a time for death. A time for destruction and a time for construction. A time for killing and a time for healing. A time for sorrow and weeping and a time for joy and laughter. A time for gain and a time for loss. A time for war and a time for peace. Life is like this, a philosophy that I believe everyone has experienced. But why does it happen to this extent and why? No one has an answer and no one knows except God. And why not now? God knows. There is no continuous state, and yet God is not obligated to make you understand everything. Therefore, there will be times when you won't understand, and you'll be in pain. But know that sometimes, you will understand later, not necessarily now, not necessarily on Earth. But it's okay to ask, there's no problem with that. But when will the answer come? It's not up to you. Is it today, tomorrow, later? No one knows. Don't think that God has truly forgotten you. Ask Him, why did you forget me? But don't believe yourself. Ask Him, why did you reject me? But don't believe that He rejected you, because if the experience distances you from God, you'll be lost. I knew someone named Abu al-Gharib al-Kabir, the son of al-Walad al-Sagir. Abu al-Gharib al-Kabir fell ill, and he was in great pain. The people of his village would gather every day in the place of worship, praying for Abu al-Gharib and pleading with God to alleviate his pain and remove the illness from him. One day, the villagers gathered at the house of Abu al-Gharib al-Kabir, and the village doctor examined him. After finishing, he told them that the illness had left Abu al-Gharib's body. The villagers rejoiced and went inside to find Abu al-Gharib al-Kabir crying and crying. They asked him, "Are you still in pain?" He replied, "No." They asked him, "Then why are you crying?" He said, "Because I'm not in pain anymore. God used to carry me, and now my balance has stopped." Professor Saji, if you saw your son chewing tobacco, would you reprimand him? But if you saw your employee chewing tobacco, would you reprimand them too? Let me illustrate my point with an anecdote. I know someone dear to me named Al-Ghali, Ibn Al-Ghali, Abu Al-Ghani, Ibn Al-Ghani, the son of Al-Dahab. Al-Ghali, Ibn Al-Ghali, is a silver merchant. Once, I was with him, and I noticed that he would occasionally put the silver into a certain temperature, and then examine it for a while. Then he would put it back into the fire, take it out again, and examine it once more. I asked him, "Al-Ghali, Ibn Al-Ghali, Abu Al-Ghani, Ibn Al-Ghani, the son of Al-Dahab, when do you extinguish the fire and remove the silver?" He replied, "When I see my reflection in it like a mirror, that's when it means the silver has become pure." In the end, I would like to tell you, Saji, focus on your own salvation and leave these judgments to God alone. Thank you, Your Honor.
And with that, the lawyer concluded the case and the conversation. Wait, what?